Good day, students. My name is Dr. Majid Mohammed of the Department of Philosophy and Classics, University of Ghana. This department is hosting the critical thinking course on behalf of the whole university. So forgive me if sometimes I make reference to philosophy. I know not all of you know anything or are studying this course called philosophy. Today's session is titled Thoughts as Objects of Scrutiny. But before we get into the discussion proper, it is important that I give you some introduction about the nature of this course. This course is going to be taught in a 13-week period, but the main tool, the prescribed text for this course, is this book, Ugrc 150. It contains all the topics that we are supposed to read. It is also a workbook. What I mean by this is that it has questions and answers that even without instructors, you should be able to answer questions or practice before exam. We recommend that you do this so that you will do well in your exam. This doesn't mean that this is the only thing you have to do. You have to visit the Sakai platform to access the tools that are there. The book contains 13 units, but we shall treat just 7 of them. The first is titled Thoughts as Objects of Scrutiny, which is our business for today. Over there, we shall be interested in speech acts and thoughts. And then we move to session 2, which is about definitions. We shall be interested in clarifying, words or ideas through the provision of definitions. There are types of definition, and we shall discuss them. And then we will move to Unit 3, titled Contrasting Types of Discourse. Here too we are interested in clarity of language, and therefore we shall be interested in how verbal disputes arise and how we can resolve them, that's if possible. And we shall learn the distinction between proverbs and metaphors, and then go ahead to talk about the passages or the types of discourse that we have. Then we will skip Unit 4 and move to Unit 5, where we discuss the normative and the empirical. What does it mean for something to be normative, and what does it mean for a sentence to be empirical? When we are done with this, especially when we discuss the types of law under this unit, we shall move to Unit 6, where the difference between deduction and induction will be addressed. Over here, we shall very much pay attention to deduction, and especially the idea of validity. And then we will move to Unit 7, which is inductive reasoning in the sciences and everyday life. Induction, or the method of reasoning that we call induction or inductive, is very much consistent with scientific reasoning. We shall see why. And then move on to the last unit, which will be Unit 10. This unit is titled Polemical Tricks and Rhetorical Ploys. Very often when people argue, they try to use means to win their arguments by all costs. Such means may not necessarily be good, and the bad ways that people deploy are what we shall call fallacies, and there are types. We are going to discuss them under 3 broad categories. The first is the fallacies of manipulation that manipulate language, and there are those that manipulate data, and finally those that change the subject of discussion. So in a nutshell, this is what we shall be discussing in the semester. So having told you this, I think we are ready to get into the discussion of thoughts as objects of scrutiny. What we need to note is this: as humans, we are thinking beings. But when we think, we express our ideas in the form of language or sentences. But how do we do this? It means that to understand how this is done and how to understand each other, we need to pay attention to certain key items that are to be discussed in this unit. One of them is a sentence, a statement, an interrogative sentence, an imperative, and a declarative sentence. We shall also make mention of emotive expressions and sentence fragments. You will soon see why this should be done. But at the end of the session, we should be able to tell, indeed, what a sentence is and why we think it should be different from a statement. And then an important notion that we will also discuss will be subject, the notion of subject, and then predicate. These are terms that some of you are familiar with in English, but then we shall put this to a good use in this course. We shall also see the difference between interrogative sentences and imperatives and why the two are sometimes connected. And these are some of the things that we are supposed to know by the end of this course. The discussion can start now with the difference between a sentence and a statement. When a sentence is expressed, or when we make a sentence, we utter a sentence which expresses our ideas. Sometimes that sentence might not qualify to be a statement. What we mean by a statement is that it is a sentence that informs us of something. But not all sentences inform us of something. Therefore, if I have a sentence like, the bottle is blue in color, I am informing us of something. And this information could be true or false. So we call this sentence a statement. Essentially, that is the difference between the two. We would like to take these things further. Several examples are given, as you can see. Just pay attention to them. If you say, for instance, that Kofi is going to school, it is a sentence, but it's also a statement as a result of what I just said. Later, we shall see those sentences that are not statements. But if it is a statement, another name for it is a declarative sentence. And every declarative sentence or a statement should have two key components, subject and predicate. The subject of a sentence should be the thing or the person that is being talked about. So in the sentence, all Ghanaians dance, the subject will be all Ghanaians because we are talking about all Ghanaians. That is what is being talked about. Or all Ghanaians as an expression is what we are talking about. But in this same sentence, we have a predicate. A predicate is that part of the sentence that says something about the subject. So if we take our sentence again, all Ghanaians dance. Dance is what we are saying of all Ghanaians. So dance becomes our predicate. All right. And now that we know the subject and the predicate, and several examples are also given in the slides that you are watching, we should be able to proceed to some other things. So now we will talk more about the types of sentence-shaped thought. Types of sentence-shaped thought, these are the ways in which our sentences are expressed. I told you that we shall look at different types of sentence, and that some of them are statements, others are not. But the types of sentence shape thought, the first is what we call declarative sentence, which I said is the same thing as a statement, so I won't say anything about it again. I'll proceed to talk about interrogatives. A sentence is interrogative when it is a question. So every question is an interrogative sentence. But the question that we are interested in here will be a question that is asked for the purpose of gaining information. For instance, if I should ask, what is your name? This is a question. I expect a response. So this sentence is interrogative. There are several examples, several sentences that one can mention or give as examples of interrogatives. And you can find many over there. And the other one is an imperative. If a sentence is described as imperative, it means it is a command. It is compelling you to do something. For instance, if I say, stand up straight, give me the details. These are commands. We call them imperatives. But there is a special case when it comes to imperatives. There are some interrogative sentences, in other words, some questions that are imperatives. These are polite requests. Polite requests in the form of questions could be commands. That's what I mean. So if somebody asks you, could you please close the door? If you are to write this, it will have a question mark at the end. It's a question, but this person is not necessarily, if you understand what he or she is saying, asking you whether you have the ability to close the door. The person is telling you to close the door. So it's a question, but at the same time, a command. That's why we need to pay attention to explicit and implicit meanings of statements. Explicitly, it looks like a question, but if you think deeply about it, you realize that it is not just a question, but it is also a command. Declarative sentences, we have already talked about them. But we need now to pay more attention to declarative sentences, because there are types. There are types of declarative sentence. The first that we would like to talk about is factual statement. If something is described as factual, it means that we can empirically tell whether it is true or false. But a sentence is factual if it describes the world as it is. So somebody is saying something about the world and saying this is the case. When you look around, you can see this. I have seen that. These are sentences that we can also confirm. So we call them factual sentences or statements. An example is, there are 10 chairs in this room. Ghana is in West Africa. These are things we can empirically establish. Then we have definitions. A definition is any sentence that tells us the meaning of a word. But there are several examples that one can give. The easiest way to get a definition is to take a dictionary and then open it up. Any word there is defined. That's a definition. But then, for the purposes of this lecture, I may choose to define a triangle. That a triangle is a three-sided figure. This is a definition. All right? Okay. The third item that we need to discuss under the types of declarative sentence will be value judgments. Value judgments are sentences that describe the world as it ought to be. It tells us how good or bad somebody or something is. So if we take any judgment of another person's actions or any situation at all, we are going to have a value judgment. But these value judgments come in two forms: moral value judgments and non-moral value judgments. A moral value judgment is a judgment of right and wrong, usually in terms of morality. So, if I say that it is wrong to steal, I have passed a judgment on the action stealing. This judgment has moral implications because stealing is a moral issue. So this is a judgment. I have said that something is wrong. It's a judgment, it's a value judgment, but it also has something to do with morality. Several examples are in the work. But a non-moral value judgment is a judgment about how good or bad someone or something is, but which is not necessarily said in connection with morality. So I can say that this knife has a good edge. It has a good edge. The word good is there. But I'm not talking about morality. I'm not saying the knife is moral. How is that possible? So goodness or badness can be in moral terms or non-moral terms. That's all this section means. And having said this, there is something that connects very well with value judgments. It's what we call metaphors. A metaphor is another way of expressing a value judgment. If you take a metaphor like the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You don't have to take metaphors literally. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord cannot be a shepherd. But then there is something, an analogy that we are trying to understand here. What does shepherd connote? Somebody who leads people, guides, protects, and so this is a metaphor. So if you say the Lord is your shepherd, you are judging that he can do something good for you. And what is that goodness? Protecting you. Several examples are also found in this book. I hope that this section is well understood. And from here, we still have to tell the difference between two things that have something to do with the declarative sentences we have discussed above. I mean the types of declaratives we have discussed about above. These are sentence fragments and emotive expressions. Very easy to understand. They are very straightforward. They can be understood in a very straightforward manner. A sentence fragment is an incomplete sentence. Very simple. Any sentence which is incomplete is a fragment. And to write a very good example, if you take any declarative sentence, for instance, Kofi is going to school. If you take the subject out, you have an incomplete sentence. If you take the predicate out, you have an incomplete sentence. So if you, as an example of an incomplete sentence or sentence fragment, you can just write Kofi. Full stop. It's incomplete. Or going to school. Incomplete. You see? That's what it means. And then finally, emotive expressions. These are sentences or expressions, I should say, of our emotion. But what we mean by emotion, emotion is a very broad term. Emotion is, what we feel. So expression of emotion it means expression of feeling. We may feel pain, anger, disgust, like, dislike, etc. These are all kinds of, emotion. So if someone, as an example, someone shouts or screams, "Hallelujah!" what comes to mind? This person is expressing emotion. One of these emotions, the ones I just talked about. But is this person feeling angry by saying hallelujah, or sad, or happy? You can say the person is happy, and happiness is an emotion. So this is an example. You find other examples in the work. Thank you very much.